Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Good evening. It is the biggest issue on the planet, and today the European Parliament followed the UK's lead in declaring a climate emergency. So tonight we are clearing the decks and devoting the whole of Channel 4 News to this one crisis, in the first ever party leaders' climate debate. The leaders of Britain's biggest parties were all invited. 5 of them are here: the Liberal Democrats, the Scottish National Party and Plaid Cymru, Labour and the Green Party of England and Wales. We kept the invitations open to the leaders of the Conservative Party and the Brexit Party. They have not taken up their places yet. Instead, a reminder: the ice caps are melting as politicians around the globe fail to cut greenhouse gas emissions in time to stop rising temperatures. Thank you to all our party leaders who came tonight. Thank you also to Michael Gove from the Conservative Party, who did come here, but sadly, as we made clear from the start, this debate was for leaders only, and our leaders were only prepared to debate other leaders. Our offer to Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage to come here and discuss the climate emergency remains open. Now, Sir David Attenborough has told this programme he believes that climate change will mean that the latest generation of young children are likely to see civil unrest, mass migration and a lack of choice in the food they eat. The broadcaster and natural historian also said it was shameful that the Conservative leader Boris Johnson didn't take part in last night's climate emergency leaders debate on Channel 4. The Conservatives have accused Channel 4 News of a provocative partisan stunt over the decision to empty chair Boris Johnson after he declined to take part. But some of the country's biggest environmental groups were there in the spin room after the debate with their own proposals on how to tackle the crisis. That interview with Sir David in a moment, but first our chief correspondent, Alex Thompson.
A leaders' debate. So here's a leader arriving for a leaders' debate. But then, unannounced and sent, he said, by Boris Johnson, with a camera crew in tow, former Tory Environment Secretary Michael Gove.
Team Boris, that sounds all right.
Alongside Boris Johnson's environmentalist dad Stanley, Mr Gove said he should join the debate because Boris Johnson was busy.
Well, I understand that the other leaders have decided that there shouldn't be a Conservative on the platform. I understand that Channel 4 News is trying to persuade them that they should allow a Conservative on the platform, but they've said no. I'm grateful.
It was a leaders' debate. It's as simple as that. You're not the leader.
Well, as Stanley said, I am a leader.
You're not the leader. Come on.
No, but let's.
This has been a coup.
But let's not quibble over prepositions. No. Because the proposition is the important thing, and the proposition.
It's not a preposition. It's a job. You're not the leader of the party.
In place of the party leaders, Johnson and Farage, who declined to come, melting ice sculptures, symbolising our warming world. In a complaint to the broadcasting regulator Ofcom last night, written before the debate, the Conservative Party described these sculptures as a provocative partisan stunt.
Mr Gove, you might not know about this, but the reports tonight that the Conservatives are reviewing, or talking about reviewing the licence for Channel 4 to broadcast because we've replaced Boris Johnson with an ice sculpture. Do you know anything about that?
No, but instead of having an ice sculpture, you could have an actual living, breathing Conservative politician, someone who lives and breathes the environment, making the case.
Conservative Party policies to fight the climate emergency include a commitment to have net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 and 75,000 acres of trees planted per year. The Brexit Party wants planting millions of trees as part of a global initiative and a ban on exporting domestic waste.
We have a great record on the environment. We brought forward the 25-year environment plan. We were the first major developed economy to declare a climate emergency and say that we needed to have net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. We have a record that we're proud of.
Their manifesto also pushes a new £500 million fund for ocean protection, a £9.2 billion drive for energy efficiency in buildings, and another billion for a new network of charging points for electric vehicles. Watching the debate in the spin room, the big beasts, domestic and global NGOs, among them campaigners for a climate election debate to happen in the first place.
We had, over 200,000 people sign a petition saying they wanted this. We built a coalition of 100 organisations representing over 15 million people. So this was a genuine call from the public to hear more about this.
The consensus here, simply staging an election debate on this issue of supreme importance, was a breakthrough, whatever your politics.
For the first time ever, the political leaders are being exposed. They've been put under scrutiny as to the quality of their arguments about how we tackle the climate and ecological emergency. And that's incredibly important because we need the political parties to be competing for the best possible plan to deal with that emergency.
Last night, the party leaders made their pitch on the biggest issue of all. So what will these campaigners demand of a new Prime Minister?
Number one demand is to stop deforestation in our supply chains. So cut it all out.
The new Prime Minister needs to put a comprehensive climate action plan in place immediately, pulling together all the actions needed across transport, across buildings, across land use and nature and infrastructure, and to put that in place before the UK hosts the next big UN climate summit at the end of 2020.
We need a government that leads the Green New Deal, which is a 10-year mobilization that changes how the economy works and makes sure it puts people and planet first. I think we've heard some incredible ideas tonight, but alone they're piecemeal. We need a plan that brings all of those things together and make sure that we're no longer tinkering around the edges.
Triple renewable energy between now and 2030 and stop extracting new fossil fuels across our energy system straight away.
All burning issues in an overheating world, long after the politics of the no-show leaders has faded.
Let's start with the fallout from that climate change debate. I'll put my teeth in on Channel 4 last night and the ice sculpture replacing Boris Johnson. Was that a childish stunt?
No, not at all. I mean, the government should be able to send the leader along to a debate. That was the invitation, a leader's debate on climate change. Conservatives talk so much about being a party that supports green issues. They also have in their manifesto a whole raft of things they could have talked about more widely in terms of environmental policies, animal welfare policies. It wouldn't have been difficult for them to do that. I think they should have gone.
Andy, I mean, the Environment Secretary, Michael Gove, was offered and, in fact, turned up, but was refused entry.
Yeah, if your name's not Boris Johnson, you're not coming in. It was quite a strict door policy they had. I found the blocks of ice far preferable, actually, to human politicians, and I'd like to see them applied more broadly in our democratic discourse. I think they gave a much clearer description of what is happening to the world. So I was all in favour of it. I like the amount of planning that had gone into it. This wasn't an off-the-cuff thing,
No, you can't produce those ice sculptures that quickly.
I started to think, actually, that someone had an idea to have an ice sculpture in place of Boris Johnson and then just built the entire debate around it.
Lucy?
Well, I think whatever you make of the ice sculptures, and I tend to agree with both of you two, I think the Conservatives have been quite clever in making this a big row about the partisanship or not of Channel 4, rather than whether or not their deadline for getting net emissions to net zero is quick enough and whether their policies go far enough.
Right, and it has actually led to an official complaint by the Conservative Party to the regulator, Ofcom, about exactly that issue. In fact, we can show our viewers parts of that letter in which the Conservative Party says it's clear that denying the Conservative Party any opportunity to contribute to this cross-party event is unfair. It goes on to say it breaches the requirements to preserve impartiality and doesn't offer an appropriately wide range of significant views to the public. Kate?
Boris Johnson was invited. It was a leaders' debate, and Boris Johnson didn't go. And I'm wondering, where was he? What else was he doing? And you know, those are the terms of the debate. I think it was very cynical for Michael Gove to turn up in that way and then to try and make it all about Channel 4 and how, you know, I've tried my best to give my point of view, but they just won't let me. I can see what they were doing, but at the end of the day, if you can't put the Prime Minister up to talk about environmental policy, that is a real weakness in your campaign.
Lucy, what about the context of the accusation that, in the Conservative Party's eyes, Channel 4 isn't fair and impartial?
Well, Channel 4 has form. It's getting into a kind of a bigger row with the Conservatives. But my view is that the public don't care about these sort of media political arguments. I think they would rather hear about climate change and green policies. And in a sense, I think the Tories, it's a lost opportunity for them. I wonder why Boris Johnson didn't seize the opportunity to come and tout the Conservative policies. I think they're pretty key to winning over some of those soft Tory voters who might look elsewhere.
Is it wise to have a row with Channel 4 at this point, Andy?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe it's deflecting away from other things we've seen before, and also for the Conservatives to complain about childish stunts after what they pulled with their Twitter feed last week is a little bit rich. I thought what was fascinating was the fact that there was a leaders' debate purely on the environment. It shows how central to politics this has belatedly become.
Yes, and that is a very good point, which we'll be discussing, of course, with the Green Party. In terms of scrutiny, there is now heated debate around whether the Prime Minister is, to some extent, avoiding scrutiny. They obviously claim, the party, that they are taking part in some debates and some phone-ins, like this one with LBC. Let's take a listen.
How many children do you have?
Look, I love my children very much, but they are not standing at this election.
No.
And I'm not therefore going to comment on them.
Are you fully and wholly involved in all their lives?
I love my children very much. They're not standing at this election.
You, but I put these questions to you.
With great respect to you, Nick.
No,
I'm not going
go
to.
for
I'm not going. No, it's fine. I'm not going to give you a talk.
You talk about others.
I'm not going to give you a talk. And
I'm
all
not
I'm
asking
saying,
them.
all I'm saying is that I am not going to put them onto the pitch.
LBC's Nick Ferrari, very pointed question there. Is it fair game to ask those sorts of questions?
I think it is fair to ask how many children the Prime Minister has. His children have a complete right to privacy, so he could give a number and then we move on and we talk about something else. But he won't do that, and he's asked repeatedly, and he won't give a number, so it does raise questions.
I mean, it must be the first time in British history that a Prime Minister's been asked, how many children do you have, and then not given an answer. I mean, you think it'd be quite a simple question.
Well, if it was that simple, I don't suppose they'd be asking it.
No, I mean, he could have ballparked it, couldn't he? He could have just said 5 to 10, give or take.
Lucy?
I usually am pretty much a fan of politicians having a right to a private life, but the Prime Minister is another question. You need to know about the moral fibre and character of the man going to be in Downing Street, or woman, and I think he really does need to answer those questions.
Well, and part of the context for this, and perhaps just justifying why Nick Ferrari can ask those sorts of questions in the way he did, is if we take a look at the front page of the Mirror, the headline is referring to an article written by Boris Johnson in The Spectator in 1995, which he, certainly moralising, to put it like that, where it says, Boris, working class men are drunk, criminal and feckless. Does that justify asking those sorts of questions when Boris Johnson himself has moralised about important social issues?
Well, I think they're justified questions already, but certainly with those kind of past remarks by him, I think we also have a right to know whether he still holds those views. Pretty worrying, the man who's going to be in charge of is in charge of the country and vying to be so after the general election, seems to hold a huge part of the electorate in such scorn.
And we're going to put that to the Tory party representative later in the programme. But from the public's point of view, as Lucy said, is it important to know what Boris has said in the past and whether he still believes it?
I think it's really important to know all about the person that's going to potentially be the next Prime Minister. He is Prime Minister at the moment. These comments, I tweeted about this yesterday and I got a lot of abuse on Twitter for having raised it. Everybody, mostly, were men that got in touch with me to say this was 25 years ago, this is completely irrelevant. I completely disagree on that point. These are comments that he's made about women, and I know his point. Let's say this article in particular, he's talking about single men and he's talking about fathers and saying that fathers need to play more of an active role in people's lives, and he blames the male sex for the proliferation of single mothers. But then he goes on to demonise single mothers and demonise their children by calling them illegitimate children and saying that they are ignorant. So he makes one point which might be valid and then he demonises the other, and he did that as well on the row about do women that wear the veil, they resemble letterboxes, because he was saying actually you can wear whatever you want, but then he said but actually women look a certain way, and he criticised them. So he makes perhaps sometimes a valid point, but then kind of on the other side, he'll always talk about women when he's writing these things in a really derogative way, in my opinion.
Is it sustainable for him, when questioned about these sorts of things, to some extent, dismiss them or park them or say that they are not legitimate?
No, I don't think so. But obviously, that's probably the best tactic when you've written the kinds of things that he has written, to try to put it off. I mean, politicians will be judged on the things they say and do, and that doesn't always play well for Boris Johnson. I think one of the reasons why that he's not taking the debates last night or with Andrew Neil, because he's clearly the Conservatives' biggest selling point electorally, but also their biggest liability. So it's a tricky balancing act for them.
One other unpredictable thing that may happen in the next few weeks before polling day itself is the NATO summit when Donald Trump is visiting. What's that going to be like, do you think?
Well, I think CCHQ will be on high alert. We've seen reports today that the Prime Minister is trying to avoid any bilateral meetings with Donald Trump. But of course, no one is free from the tyranny of the US President's Twitter feed. And he may well take to his mobile phone to endorse Boris Johnson, which would be a gift for Jeremy Corbyn.
Now, let's turn to the Conservatives, because we can talk to Nick Gibb, the Schools Minister. He's in Southampton. While we were talking about tonight's debate, why did Boris Johnson not turn up for last night's Channel 4 debate?
Well, we're very disappointed that Channel 4 wouldn't accept Michael Gove as a participant in that debate.
But my question is why Boris Johnson didn't go.
Well, you've heard from Nick Robinson. They've got Rishi Sunak tonight. They've got Rebecca Long-Bailey. They were offered, and Michael Gove turned up at the studios last night. He's the second most senior member of the cabinet, and he's very experienced in environmental issue, a great track record in improving
but the clues
the
in the title,
and
Nick
Channel
Gibb,
4 took the decision not to have.
I understand that, but the clues in the title, it was a leaders' debate.
Well,
so one would expect Boris Johnson to be there.
One of the leaders of our government, one of the most senior members of our government, and Channel 4 took a very tendentious view of not having Michael Gove in that debate. On top of which, of course, they had the melting ice block, which, as well, you could argue is a political point, which is why we have submitted a complaint to Ofcom about Channel 4.
Right, so you've decided to issue a complaint in response to Boris Johnson not turning up last night for that leaders' debate on the environment. Let's just show everybody what's been quoted from it in the Telegraph. If we are re-elected, we will have to review Channel 4's public service broadcasting obligations. Channel 4 has a special role enshrined in legislation. Any review would, of course, look at whether its remit should be better focused so it is serving the public in the best way possible. Is that really your strategy, to threaten Channel 4?
No, it certainly isn't. There is going to be a review. Ofcom renewed Channel 4's licence in 2014 for 10 years. That expires, obviously, then in 2024, and there will obviously be a review at some point during the next Parliament.
Right, but you are threatening them, aren't you?
No,
off the back of this debate, you have fallen out with Channel 4, and now you are saying, and it's clear from the implication, that you are questioning Channel 4's motivation and you're reviewing the public service broadcasting obligations.
No, they're separate issues. There will be a review because the 10 years expires in 2024, but we have made an official complaint to Ofcom about last night. Look, the Prime Minister can't do everything. He's running an election campaign right across the country. He's taken part in the head-to-head debates on ITV last week. He did Question Time with Fiona Bruce last week. Next Friday we have another head-to-head on the BBC. And of this morning he was taking questions from LBC listeners.
Yes.
So he is out there answering questions, open to scrutiny, taking part in these debates, but he can't take part in every debate. There simply isn't the time to do that.
But in the quotes I've just read, you are questioning Channel 4's remit and saying it should be better focused. What, better focused to suit the Conservative Party? I mean,
we're saying
it really shouldn't be the Conservative Party
be
deciding what the remit of Channel 4 is.
No, we're submitting an official complaint to Ofcom, the regulator. The issue of the review of the licence is something that will happen anyway, and we'll go through the usual procedures in doing that, because the 10 years expires in 2024. So whoever's in power after this general election, there will be a review during the next Parliament.
All right. Nick, should Boris Johnson agree to do the Andrew Neil interview?
Well, there are discussions, of course, taking place between the BBC and the Prime Minister.
What's your opinion?
I'm not party to those discussions. I'm the Schools Minister here to talk about education matters.
But you will have a view. Do you think, in the light of what's gone on in this election campaign, that Boris Johnson should do the Andrew Neil interview? We've heard Jeremy Corbyn and Nicola Sturgeon. Joe Swinson has agreed to do it, as has Nigel Farage. Should Boris Johnson do it?
Well, it's a balance about time. I mean, he's running, as I said, he's running a general election campaign. He's going around the country campaigning. He has taken part in a number of debates on television, head-to-head with Jeremy Corbyn last week on ITV, the Fiona Bruce Question Time. He did LBC this morning. He's taken part, just this morning now, he's doing another press conference on getting Brexit done. That is our objective, to get a majority in this election so we get Brexit done and release the potential
Should he do the interview,
country.
yes or no?
Well, I think that's a matter for the Prime Minister. As I said, they're in discussions with the BBC, but he can't do everything. As I've said, he is taking part. He's running a general election campaign. Our focus is making sure we get a working majority in the House of Commons so we can stop
All right,
dither and
let's
delay
not have the campaign
on
lines. I'm only
Brexit.
asking about whether he should do the debate
Well, that's
or not.
a matter for people other than me.
All right, well, let's talk about Boris Johnson's character, because, as you say, he did an interview with Nick Ferrari on LBC, and he was asked about how many children he has, and we've had a discussion about whether those are legitimate questions to ask. But it is in relation to things that he has said in the past, this Spectator article from 1995 that has now been unearthed. I mean, the first quote at the beginning, I've got the whole article in front of me, and he says, "I blame the male sex for the appalling proliferation of single mothers." And at the end of that sentence, he says, "and which is producing a generation of ill-raised, ignorant, aggressive and illegitimate children who, in theory, will be paying for our pensions." What do you say to that?
Well, if you often with these, I haven't read that full article, but often with these quotes that are taken out of context.
No, it's not taken out of context, because I've got it in front of me. I've read the whole article and I've got other bits to show you, but that is the beginning.
They very often have a different meaning. And Boris Johnson said this morning on the radio that he never means to give offence when he writes his articles. He was a
But
journalist,
this is a moralising tone to this article all the way through, and I'll come on to what he has said about working-class men. So he says the modern British male is useless and women should have the common sense to detect that. He says if he is blue-collar, he is likely to be drunk, criminal, aimless, feckless and hopeless, and perhaps claiming to suffer from low self-esteem brought on by unemployment. If he is white-collar, he is likely to be little better. It is no use blaming uppity and irresponsible women for becoming pregnant in the absence of a husband. Does he still think these things?
I don't know. I don't think he does. I think these articles were written before he went into politics. He never means to give offence. He's written millions of words as a columnist. So inevitably, if you trawl through those columns, those articles, you will find things, if quoted out of context, have a meaning which people find offensive.
Nick Gibb, these are not, I promise you, these are not taken out of context. I have read the whole article from start till finish. It was written in 1995, but this is an article that points to important social issues and views then, and the Prime Minister should be subjected to those questions now. People will want to know what sort of man he is. You say you don't think he believes these sorts of things. Should we find out?
Well, I know he doesn't believe these sort of things. The whole government is determined to raise living standards to make sure that more people are in work. We have the lowest level of unemployment since the mid-1970s because we have a strong economy. So I know that the Prime Minister is committed to ensuring that living standards for everyone in our economy continue to rise. But if you are a journalist, if you are a columnist, and you've been writing articles for many, many years, millions of words as he's been written, if you trawl through them, you will find things that people don't like and don't agree with, and which he probably doesn't agree with today. And of course, he is taking part in huge numbers of debates. Next week, he's got the head-to-head with Jeremy Corbyn on the BBC. He's had LBC questions this morning. There's plenty of opportunities for journalists and the members of the public to ask him about those questions.
Absolutely, and indeed, Sky's Beth Rigby did exactly that at the press conference. Let's have a listen.
As a younger man, you describe children of single mums as ill-raised, ignorant, aggressive and illegitimate. That's how you've described millions of your own citizens. How can they vote for you if that's what you think of them?
Well, Beth, as I said, well, millions of words that I've written, we will find, everybody is able to find some that they can cull from the text and twist them and distort them in whatever way that they choose.
He had an opportunity there, Nick Gibb, to say, I don't believe those things anymore. It was historic and I've changed my mind. He didn't. He has just said, as you have said, oh, well, these were, millions of words that I have written a long time ago. That's not an answer to the question about whether he believes these views.
Well, all I can say is I've worked with Boris Johnson for many years and I know he is committed to creating a fairer society with more opportunities for more people, and that's what's driving everything in this election campaign. It's what's driving our education policy, it's what's driving our economic policy. We want to deliver Brexit, so he can stop the dither in Parliament, which is preventing
Nick,
and Parliament focusing on those issues.
You're always
returning
to the campaign lines, but there is an important question at the heart of this election when it comes to Boris Johnson. Because he has written these things, and for some people they will be pretty shocking, he's still refusing to answer questions about whether he still holds those views and about whether he himself lives up to some of the things that he's written. He says at the end of the article, something must be found first to restore women's desire to be married. That means addressing the feebleness of the modern Briton, his reluctance or inability to take control of his woman and be head of a household. Now, he needs to say, one way or t'other, that he doesn't hold those views, or if he does, explain why.
Well, as I said, the Prime Minister said he never means to cause offence when he writes these articles. And, you know, on many occasions, when you read the whole context of the article, you can see what he's trying to say and doesn't mean to take offence. He does use colourful language, there's no question about that. And actually, I've been campaigning on the doorstep in my constituency and in other constituencies, and that is one of the things that people find appealing about Boris Johnson. They like him because he is prepared to say and use colourful language, and that's what really lies, in part, lies behind his popularity with the general public.
Right, what, including things like men should take control of their woman?
Well, I don't believe he believes that, frankly. Often, as I said, these
other Conservatives, campaigning believe that?
Do appear offensive. But you need to ask him about these things. My experience of dealing with Boris Johnson is he's a very caring politician. He's a strong leader. He wants a strong economy. He wants to widen opportunities for people. He's a one-nation Conservative. He just needs to get. We need to get Brexit down. We need to get the economy focused on.
You've had that saying. We know what your line is on Brexit.